This is my ECED 3112 standardized testing presentation. I did it on PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through it now. So, standardized testing, what is the big deal? Standardized testing exams are often multiple choice questions that are designed to test students on what they should already know. So these are not exams that you're going to take at the beginning of the year. These are usually done after a content unit or after the end of the year. They can determine whether or not a student will pass on to the next grade, whether they can graduate from high school, or if they can enter college. This report will attempt to kind of explain the pros, the cons, and the alternatives to standardized testing in education. So standardized testing, what and why? There are three main types of standardized tests. There are achievement tests, aptitude tests, and screening or diagnostic tests. Achievement tests are designed to determine what children have already learned in school. So these are going to be end of the year assessments, these are going to be end of quarter assessments, these are going to be end of module assessments. Anytime a teacher needs to assess whether or not a student has learned a set of material. The information should be familiar to them, is typically taken from the most commonly used curriculum. So if they were, for instance, a national test, they're going to use whatever is the most commonly used curriculum and take their questions from there. This test can show where students rank in a class, it can show where they rank in school, or they can show where they rank in a state or nationally. Common national achievement tests, so these are tests that a lot of students will take, include the California Achievement Test, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, and the Stanford Achievement Test. And I have taken the Iowa Test and the Stanford Achievement Test myself. The next type of standardized test is an aptitude test. So aptitude tests are designed to predict future success or performance for students. So these are not done at the end of a module. These are kind of done to prepare for the next big steps. This might be a test you take before entering college or before beginning job training. Intelligence tests and IQ tests also fit under aptitude tests. They are particularly in early childhood, but all the way up to adulthood, they are very controversial because a lot of people feel that you can't base success off of one factor. These tests can be used for determining college admissions, as I said, or a readiness for a specific skill, such as entering into kindergarten or moving on to the third grader. The third type of a standardized test would be a screening or diagnostic test. These ones are designed to determine if children are at risk for various learning disabilities or conditions, and these are more broad than the other type of exams. Instead of only having questions over specific content, they may include challenges to determine a child's physical development, child's mental development, cognitive development, basically anything that could impact learning. They are designed to identify specific difficulties a student may have, and they are administered by a professional, so they have to be done by a special education teacher, a school psychologist, a speech pathologist, or an occupational therapist. So your standard classroom teacher or PTA mom couldn't administer a screening or diagnostic test and still get valid results. So as for standardized testing, it really started to pick up a little bit in the 1800s. They date back much further than that, but the first time they were really used, especially in the US, was in the 1800s. So they first became popular in Boston as a way to compare school progress to other schools in the area. These tests were soon adopted nationally, and in 1906, standardized testing was already being criticized, with people saying that standardized testing was too focused on one topic and that education would become almost tunnel visioned on that specific test preparation. The first automatic test scoring machine was invented in 1938. And fun fact about this machine needed to be able to be grabbed by pencils. And the number 2 pencils that we still use today are actually a holdover from the 1938 test exam reader, because modern test readers can actually read ballpoint pen or number 2 pencils. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Then in 1965, testing was ramped up again in 1983. The most famous reform attempt for testing was really emphasized was in 2000 to 2022 when George Bush started the No Child Left Behind Act. This was then overhauled by Barack Obama in 2008 with the new Race to the Top initiative, which offered more federal funding for schools that had good test grades, but also widened the scope of what would be an acceptable measure of success from just standardized test scores. In both 2020 and 2021, national and state standardized testing were placed on hold because of the pandemic. However, this year, 2022, some of those exams are scheduled to take place again, such as the NAEP, or National Assessment of Educational Progress Exam, which is a biannual test. In 2001, Ohio developed the Ohio Graduation Test, which now serves as the graduation requirement for high school students starting in 2007. Ohio also administers the Ohio Achievement Test, or the OATS, to students from 3rd grade to 8th grade. Both of these tests are scored by ranking students' understanding in 5 different levels, from advanced all the way down to limited understanding. And the 3rd grade OAT in particular is meant to satisfy a national requirement for the 3rd grade reading benchmark. So most tests are administered in the fall, as that's when a lot of classes are wrapping up, so end of the year assessments are very common, such as the 3rd grade reading assessment or graduation exams for high school students. These exams are much less picky than, for instance, a diagnostic exam, and these can be met by any person who meets the requirements, which are simply that anyone administering a test must be an employee of the district and hold a license, certificate, or permit issued by the Ohio Department of Education, and test administrators have to make sure that they can only have 30 students or fewer in their exam. If there are more than 30, then they have to have either a second reviewer or a proctor present. Some of this data will be used to fulfill national requirements, like results for the 3rd grade reading assessment, or to see where states rank nationally, and others will be used for the school data for students to know if they should pass on to the next grade or how well that particular teacher is doing as well. So now we're moving on to, I believe, section 3, which should be on the kind of the downsides of standardized testing and why they're not good for authentic learning. So frequent standardized testing takes away from classroom time. So when teachers could be teaching more on particular subjects that students are interested in or that they think would be of more use to the students, they have to instead focus that class time on content that is going to be on the exam. It also takes up class time for the exam itself. I remember back in 3rd grade we had to take an entire week out of the year to the Iowa test instead of focusing on more learning. Another problem with the standardized testing is that instead of a well-rounded education that focuses on many different topics, a lot of our education now is focused solely on what's going to be on a standardized test. Finally, basing instructional techniques on standardized tests puts some learners at a disadvantage. Any students who may have trouble sitting still, such as students with a learning disability or ADHD, or students who struggle to read test questions, like students with dyslexia, this will put them at a disadvantage because they are not in the same position to sit down and take a singular question exam as some of the other students in the classroom. If you were to give these same students an option to take a practical exam or to give their question answers orally or even to do a portfolio assessment instead, they would rank significantly higher in their grades. So we're moving on to the next section, and this is on the role of standardized testing in early childhood. So standardized testing is not only for upperclassmen, it actually starts all the way in pre-kindergarten grades. So one of the first tests you'll take is a diagnostic test before kindergarten, and this will kind of determine whether or not you're ready for learning. There will also almost always be a kindergarten entrance examination. This isn't necessarily a test, but more of an assessment of the student to see if they're ready to enter the kindergarten, and if they're not, then it will be recommended that they be held back another year. Another way that standardized tests are used in early childhood is to track and report their progress to parents and administrators. So this is really meaningful for a lot of pre-kindergarten programs. They will kind of track what they're learning in the school so that they can then report it to parents who are sending them to these programs so that they know that their kids are getting something out of it. Finally, it's important to remember to not put much stock in standardized testing at any age, but especially for early childhood, because every child develops at a different rate, and they may be, like a student may be a bit behind some of her peers, but then catch up really fast the next year. And labeling her as a difficult tester or even a slow learner because of an assessment when she's in kindergarten could really affect her education for the rest of her life. So now moving on to the section that I enjoyed the most, which was on alternatives to standardized testing. And I believe this one was for section 5. So my favorite alternative assessment I found when I was doing this research was a portfolio assessment. So this is where teachers will put portfolios together for all of their students. They will take reading samples, they will take samples of their writing, of their drawing, of their math, and they will put it all together and they can evaluate that to see not only the average grades that a student is getting and to see where they're ranking, but also to see the progress they've made from the beginning of the year all the way until the end of the year. Another assessment that I liked a lot was a stealth assessment. So this is often done on computers or with computer games. So while a student is doing a learning game or a learning activity online, that computer is tracking their progress, their right answers, their wrong answers, the amount of time they hesitate between each one, and it is compiling all this information. So if a student were to do this once or twice a week for the whole year, you would be able to see their progress there too as well, but it would also collect grades in a way that is less stressful than a really high stakes test, because the student is in a more comfortable environment and they do not feel the same pressure they would during an exam, so they will not have to deal with nerves, which could also improve their test grades. Finally, the third assessment that I thought was cool is a sampling assessment. So this is basically the same tests as any other standardized test, but instead of every student in every school taking these exams, each school or district would have a sample of the student body take these exams. So you would take the same demographics and understanding that you have of your student body as a whole, and you would take a much smaller section of students that matches up to those same demographics, and they would take the test, and those grades would be the average for the entire district. So this will still fulfill all the exam requirements while also taking away less time from learning. Okay, so that's all I got. Thank you for watching. I really hope that this fulfilled all the requirements and that you were able to get some helpful information from this project. I greatly enjoyed working on it, and I'm super excited to have this information in my toolbox for when I have my own classroom. Thank you for watching.